Do we have a commitment to secure the border? Yes. What are the options that we have available to us? Let's make sure they work. Because we do, while we need to address the issue of immigration and the challenge we have of undocumented people in our country, we certainly don't want any more coming in.
Today I come to the floor to seek unanimous consent to pass a smart, tough, and effective $600 million bill that will significantly enhance the security and integrity of our nation's border, which currently lacks the resources needed to fully combat the drug smugglers, gun runners, human traffickers, money launderers, and other organized criminals that seek to do harm to innocent Americans along our border.
Today, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are singing a different tune now that Trump is president. Meanwhile, the conflict over the border is heating up as wave after wave of migrants are working their way through Mexico to try to get into America. How do Christians balance compassion with the proper biblical duties of a government?
Should a nation be able to define its own borders and secure those borders so that the nation makes the decision of who comes in and when they come in? Well, that's the very definition of a nation.
Today in this country, you have estimates of 10 to 12 million people are living here illegally. But many people actually believe that number is much closer to 20, 25 million. Let's fix the border issue first, fix our broken immigration system first. Then we can talk about what we do with folks who've come here illegally.
One of the federal government's jobs is to come up with a uniform system of laws governing immigration and naturalization, and to make sure that people from outside of our country don't come into our country illegally. It's not doing that job as effectively right now as it has at other times in the past.
But don't we have an obligation to help everyone who wants to come in, ask some people, in the name of compassion, in the name of Christ?
Some Christians are saying, look, as a matter of love for our neighbor, which knows no national boundaries, after all, that's the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan, is that we should love people who aren't of our own ethnicity, right? As a matter of expression of love of neighbor, we should have open borders. What they fail to recognize is that God ordains the state to enforce justice through a combination of what we might call national defense, that is, defending citizens against invasion from outside, right? And law enforcement, defending citizens against crime by their neighbors. And unfortunately, we've got some evangelicals who are lining up in favor of unrestricted immigration and who don't recognize that some immigrants can constitute a significant threat.
Another concern about open borders from a biblical perspective is the very real threat from Islamic radicals. It may be a small number, perhaps, but we saw on 9/11 how only 19 terrorists were able to kill thousands and disrupt the lives of hundreds of millions in a matter of hours.
Some of the immigrants coming into the United States and Europe do have nefarious ends and are actually consciously setting out to conquer and to destroy and to commit terrorist acts or set in place infrastructure to advance Sharia.
There's an internal memorandum which was seized by the FBI from a Muslim Brotherhood operative in the United States, describing how those in the United States saw their work in America and the West. And what they regarded themselves as up to was what they called a grand jihad aimed at the elimination and destruction of Western civilization from within by sabotage. And that is what the mission of the Muslim Brotherhood and its tentacles in the United States is.
America has always welcomed immigrants, but you have to come through the front door. There's no country in the world that would not protect its borders. This is insanity. It's madness. Either people, I have to believe, they hate America and want to destroy America, or have other motives, which it can only be evil, because the scripture is very clear. In Romans 13, it says that the government is to protect the citizenry. They're not to get involved in, it doesn't talk about anything else, education or that or that or the other thing. It's to protect that's the number one job, is to protect the citizens of the country. And unfortunately, those people who claim to believe the Bible in leadership, they're not obeying that part of the Bible.